Chapter 536, Local Faith.
What, hunt Admiral of Blood?
Dennis almost raised his right hand to his ear. His first reaction was that he had misheard. However, Gairman Sparrow's smile with hidden madness and the slight movement of his captain's eyebrows, an abnormality of hers, reminded him that what was said had really happened.
This madman Gairman Sparrow really is daring. This is one of the 7 pirate admirals. They aren't people that a character like Klein Moretti can be compared with.
Dennis's pupils shrank, his heart on the brink of roaring.
Putting aside the fact that Admiral of Blood Senior's own might, just the pirates underneath him are intimidating enough. His first mate, third mate, and the captains of each ship are all capable of independently leading a large pirate crew. There are still many of the crew which Klein Moretti had brought to buy him with him in the Blood Pirate crew. When Vice Admiral Hurricane Kilongos died silently like a wild dog in Backland, it was mainly because he wasn't with his pirate crew. However, Admiral of Blood Senior is different. He seldom leaves his flagship and rarely leaves the company of his men. Even if the focus is placed back on Senior's strength, it would still be extremely terrifying. He's mysterious, bizarre, and is one of the few powerhouses at the sea who is second only to the 4 kings. Even Captain might not dare to claim to be his superior. A madman's guts really does exceed my imagination. No, he doesn't know the meaning of fear at all. The death and replacement of a pirate admiral will definitely be a great shock to the 5 seas.
One thought after another flashed through Dennis's mind, but in the end, he strangely calmed down. It was because he recalled that Gairman Sparrow was a powerhouse at the level of the 7 admirals, and there might be a hidden, terrifying organization backing him. Edwina said after a few seconds of silence,
"Do you know of the Rose School of Thought?"
Not only do I know them, I've also killed their people and taken their mystical items. Wait a minute. Why do I have to describe myself as a bad guy?
Klein converged his smile and said in an unperturbed manner,
I've hunted their members.
Edwina fell silent again. Next to her, Dennis once again had various thoughts.
What are they talking about? What's the Rose School of Thought? Where am I? Whose dream is this?
After a short moment of silence, Edwina said,
After the huge battle with Vice Admiral Dusk's pirate crew, Senior's crew vanished. At present, no one knows where they are. One will have to wait patiently.
Is this an agreement?
Klein once again revealed a smile.
I do not lack patience. How can I contact you?
Edwina turned her head to look at Dennis.
He knows how.
Me? Soulfall ritual? Wait a minute, Captain. You mean I have to follow this madman Gairman Sparrow during this period of time? No. Who knows when this fellow will go crazy?
With a start, Dennis quickly opened his mouth and said,
Captain, I've already left the Golden Dream for too long. I've missed too many lessons. I can't wait to return.
He tried his hardest to show his sincerity in his eyes, filling them with the desire for knowledge.
I believe we can switch to someone else, like Iron Skin and Barrel.
Before he finished his sentence, Edwina suddenly raised her right hand and pressed it against her ear. She looked slightly to the side and said without expression,
What did you say? I couldn't hear it. Rozelle's dream spell is reaching its limits.
The pirate admiral's skirt fluttered slightly as she took a step back before her figure quickly turned faint, reducing into points of fragmented light. The rest of Dennis's words were left stuck in his throat. He stretched out his right hand in an attempt to grasp something, but he ended up weakly drooping down.
Rozelle's dream spell? The Emperor's presence in the field of mysticism is also quite formidable. The full name of the Vice Admiral Iceberg is Edwina Edwards. Edwards. Isn't this the surname of one of the Emperor's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? A descendant? However, from the tone of Vice Admiral Iceberg, she isn't familiar with the eldest daughter of the Emperor, Bernadette. They might not even know each other.
Klein looked at Dennis, whose expression had completely collapsed, and let out a soft laugh.
Perhaps one day I will call you Mr. 10,000 pounds.
Dennis straightened his back in fright. Then, he saw Gairman Sparrow's figure disappear from his dream.
If I were only sequence 7 and had a bounty of 7 or 8,000 pounds, then I would be targeted everywhere I go.
Danitz stood rooted in his dream, his head hurting the more he thought about it. In the evening, Danitz looked at Gehrman Sparrow, who was dressed as a native.
Today, we'll be visiting the local faction. We might be able to find some good things there. Heh. They have a great need for Beyonder ingredients, food, and weapons.
At this point, Danitz looked Gehrman Sparrow up and down. It was rare for him to find something that he was better than him at. He said with a smile,
Their area is filled with local people. There aren't even many people with mixed blood. If there's even the slightest signs of an abnormality in their clothing, you will be discovered. Your pantaloons and brown jacket are fine, but you can't wear a shirt inside. A real native wears Taraba shirts. They're similar to Cecil shirts, but they're either all blue or white. They don't wear caps, headscarves, or anything. Also, people like you, who look obviously Loanese, will encounter very serious discrimination and hostility there, just like a wolf that sneaks into a flock of sheep. You can't hide your existence at all.
Before he could finish, he saw Gehrman Sparrow tilt his head and look at him. His deep facial features quickly turned soft. His fair skin was instantly stained with the color of bronze. In just a snap, he had become an undeniable native that didn't stand out in any way. After a few seconds of silence, Danitz laughed dryly as if nothing had happened.
Me too, I have to disguise myself.
Your disguise? It actually trades Beyonder ingredients, food, and weapons.
Klein took off his cap and sat down.
What local faction?
Ahem, to put it simply. Ahem?
The Resistance.
Danitz suddenly wasn't sure if Gehrman Sparrow had any connections with the loan officials. Klein was startled for a second.
Resistance?
Danitz smiled awkwardly and said,
People who clamor for independence and for natives to administer their local affairs. Their encampment is deep in the woods or at sea. They cooperate with many pirates and adventurers. Of course, the ones backing them are mainly people from Fasak and Intis. Often, there will be priests from the god of combat and the eternal blazing sun secretly coming over.
Bayam isn't that calm after all. After leaving the kingdom and coming to the sea, Klein finally understood what it meant by an international situation. This wasn't something that could be compared to reading about wars in East Balaam from the papers. He nodded slightly and didn't object to visiting the local faction. After leaving the Wind of Azure Inn, Klein followed Danitz, whose face was painted black. They went through the streets, heading all the way southeast. Leaving the confines of the City of Generosity, they entered a zone filled with different architectural styles. The buildings here had raised floors, propped up by wooden pilings. There were 3- or 4-story buildings that had evolved from the Lowen-styled terrace houses. The roads that split from each other were narrow and dirty, with many stalls on either side. They sold all kinds of headgear, earrings, and accessories made of stone. They were mostly bright red or multicolored, Danitz whispered.
What a bunch of strange fellows. They especially like bright colors, just like those venomous snakes in the forest.
As someone from Intis, you aren't much better either. You advocate the color of gold, and advocate a sense of luxury and exquisiteness, just like a nouveau riche.
Klein lampooned. They passed by a group of dark-skinned, skinny, and shriveled natives entering the alleys which had closed drying over their heads. The scene before their eyes suddenly opened up, revealing a small municipal square. On the square, a group of locals was gathered around the central pond. Some were kneeling, some were prostrating, some were mumbling, and some were singing softly. They had devout expressions, but they looked numbed. As soon as they realized that someone was approaching, they quickly got up and ran into the surrounding alleys in a flurry. All the windows on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors of the surrounding houses clanged shut, and the square grew quiet, but Klein's spiritual perception told him that there were many people behind the windows, around the alleys, in the dark corners, watching these strangers who had suddenly arrived in their world. Danitz lowered his head and said in a suppressed voice,
Don't worry, this is their way of protecting themselves.
Oh?
Klein expressed his doubts. Danitz let out a chuckle.
Before this place was completely colonized, the natives on the Rorstedt archipelago always believed in sea god Kalvetua. They believed that this deity, who appears in the form of a gigantic sea serpent, would protect all the islands here, preventing them from being devoured by earthquakes or tsunamis. Now that this belief has been outlawed, the Church of the Lord of Storms has been constantly fighting against the heretics. Even the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam and Machinery are unable to expand their influence here, and there are only a few cathedrals. But in fact, how can the faith that has been in place for centuries, if not a millennium, be so easily eradicated? There are still plenty of believers of the sea god in Bayam, Blue Mountain Island, and the Rorstedt Sea. Even if a bunch of people are captured every 1 to 2 months, a situation in which they suffer all kinds of extreme punishment, it's impossible to reverse this situation anytime soon. The Resistance's main pillar of support are the believers of the sea god. In my opinion, it will take at least another 100 years before the faith of the sea god will be completely eradicated. Of course, that's under the premise that there aren't any other disruptive elements.
Sea god Kalvetua. Its image is of a gigantic sea serpent.
As Klein listened thoughtfully, he followed Danitz into a 4-story house on the right. He went to the top floor via a narrow staircase. Knock! 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 Danitz knocked on the door to his left. Someone asked in a low voice.
Who is it?
Danitz replied with a chuckle.
A friend who brings wine and barbecue.
The person inside asked a strange question.
Where from?
Danitz stepped back.
At sea.
Creak. The door slowly opened, and Klein saw a naked arm. The arm was tattooed with a blue, hideous sea serpent. Chapter 537. Excessive Spiritual Perception. Behind the door was a bare-chested man with a hideous blue sea serpent tattooed on his arm and short streaks of red paint painted on the sides of his cheeks, chest, and abdomen, each group formed out of 3 streaks.
Really exotic. However, aren't you afraid of being too conspicuous? Aren't you afraid of being caught by the police while you're outside? You're part of the resistance that engages in secret operations.
Klein was about to retract his gaze when he was almost forced to frown by the man's thick, messy eyebrows and cold-blooded eyes.
He has killed many people.
Klein made a rough judgment based on his spiritual intuition. Honestly speaking, due to his previous life's identity and knowledge, he initially held a lot of sympathy for the rebels under colonial rule, having no sense of belonging as a Loanese. However, after hearing that the man and the followers of the sea god Kalvetua basically engaged in the same acts, he became even more wary and repulsed. This wasn't to say that he discriminated against the local faith, but rather he understood that the traditional faith of all the colonial islands was still in a primitive stage that believed in sacrifice. They worshipped with blood, using living sacrifices, and were still in a state of complete ignorance.
In addition, with the experiences of the Emperor and myself, the beyonder nature of this world is filled with madness and twistedness. A deity still in the primitive stage of sacrifice is basically unable to resist this trend. It's quite obvious what kind of style they follow.
Without a word, Klein followed Danitz into the room. A mild voice sounded from the area near the windows.
Edmonton, who's here?
The tattooed man closed the door and said,
They've disguised themselves.
At that moment, Klein had taken a good look at the situation in the room and gained a basic understanding of it. The living room wasn't very large. A cupboard, a table, and a few chairs were enough to make it look cramped. To the right were 2 doors, leading to what appeared to be a bedroom. To the left was a kitchen, separated by a cabinet. As for the washroom, there was no doubt that there wasn't one. When Klein went upstairs, he discovered that there was a common washroom at the corner of each flight of stairs. The stench of them not being washed for extended periods of time urged any passers-by to walk up faster. Directly in front of him was a window. 2 bamboo poles hung out and were used to hang a lot of clothes to dry. There were 4 or 5 men sitting or standing in the bedroom's doorway and the living room. All of them were dark-skinned natives with slightly curly hair. They wore dark blue Taraba shirts and more or less had red paint on their bare skin and as for the sea serpent tattoo, Klein couldn't tell if it was there or not because of the clothing. Some of them had revolvers at their waists, some carrying brownish-red hunting rifles. Some even carried gray steel backpacks and long, thick, high-pressure steam rifles. They formed a semicircle around Danitz and Klein, who had just entered the room. The person who spoke was a wheelchair-bound man in his 40s. He wore a jacket and had a blanket over his knees. He had a shaved head, a slightly green beard on both sides of his face, and his dark brown eyes were calm and collected. He glanced at his visitor and slowly smiled.
Blazing.
Danitz was stunned for a moment before forcing out a laugh.
Kalat, you have a good eye.
He roared inwardly, unwilling to accept the fact.
Dog shit. Am I so bad at disguising myself?
Kalat ignored Blazing's insincere praise and instead chuckled.
I heard that you killed steel and blood brambles.
Danitz retorted without hesitation.
How else would they be dead?
Kalat narrowed his eyes, slowly shifting his gaze to Klein, who had a featureless face. He knew very well that Blazing Danitz alone would have a hard time killing Blood Brambles Hendry, much less Steel Movetti. His success was rumored to be due to the help of a powerful adventurer, a seasoned bounty hunter.
Is it the person beside him? When he looked into Klein's eyes, he didn't see any nervousness, worry, or vigilance. Those eyes were like a deep ocean. It could very well be. At the very least, he's stronger than Blazing.
He signaled to Edmonton and the others with his eyes, secretly informing them to be on their guard. Kalat didn't pursue the subject.
What are you doing here?
Danitz subconsciously looked at Klein, and after seeing his nod of affirmation, he replied,
Here to see what good things you have to offer.
Kalat pointed to a table and said,
It's all placed there.
There were many strange and different items laid out, including a whistle made of bone, a simple and crude bagpipe, an iron-black leaf, and a rock stained with blood. Without waiting for Klein and Danitz to examine the items, Kalat clapped his hands and said,
I have a mission. If you can complete it, you can freely choose an item from these at no additional cost.
He laughed and added,
By the definition of you foreigners, they aren't mystical objects, but they all have some supernatural power. But it will slowly, yes, slowly weaken until it disappears.
Klein asked calmly, having no intention of hiding the fact that Danitz was only a follower.
What mission?
He reached into the blanket that extended to his knees and took out a stack of white paper.
Find out where they are. If you can catch them directly, you will get even more.
He raised his arms and began to display lifelike portraits, including a lady with greenish-gray eyes dressed in a man's shirt.
Letitia Dolera.
Klein recognized who the resistance was looking for at a glance. It was the female archaeologist and adventurer he had met last night and had boarded the same ship with this morning. She was suspected to be a member of the Moses Ascetic Order, or the Element Dawn. Danitz looked at it closely for 2 seconds and found the picture vaguely familiar. Suddenly, he remembered where he had seen her before.
Gehrman Sparrow had shown it in his dreams. He had just asked the captain about it in the afternoon, and we're already bumping into something relevant in the evening. Isn't he too resourceful at gathering information?
Danitz resisted his urge to glance at the crazy adventurer beside him, afraid that Kalat and Edmonton would notice something amiss. He was very experienced in this area.
The resistance, who believe in the sea god, are looking for Letitia. The faith of the sea god spreads throughout the Rorstead archipelago, including Samim. There was a snake last night. The image of the sea god is that of a gigantic sea serpent.
Klein superimposed the two matters together and quickly came to a preliminary conclusion.
Archaeologist Letitia and company had obtained an important item involving the sea god in the forgotten temple in the ancient forest of Sime Island. Hence, it resulted in last night's probing and the Resistance's search.
Klein thought for a moment, then he gave a perfunctory reply.
I'll keep an eye out.
He silently added a few words inwardly.
I won't randomly get myself involved in matters related to evil spirits. Of course, if it's necessary, then I will report it to the officials.
Kalat nodded and said,
Take a look first and see if there's anything you want.
Klein walked over and was just about to inquire as he made his selection when he suddenly sensed something and subconsciously looked towards the right side of the item pile. There was a short sword made of thin bones. It was slightly longer than a forearm and had a milky white body. There were a few dark red deep stripes on it.
It can trigger my spiritual perception.
Klein stretched out his right hand in an attempt to pick up the sharp bone sword that was placed right at the front to carefully examine it. The moment his fingers touched the bone sword, cries of despair and pain suddenly echoed in his mind. A thick stench of blood faintly appeared at the tip of his nose, and he seemed to see many distorted and rotten, illusory figures that were covered in mucus. Klein's forehead ached, as though he had been pierced by a needle, and he subconsciously retracted his finger.
A little sinister. It's not a simple item.
Klein, who had experienced things far more intense before, only showed a slight change in expression. He resisted the urge to activate his spirit vision, afraid that he would see something he shouldn't. Noticing this, Kalat exchanged glances with Edmonton and said with a smile,
This bone sword is capable of draining an enemy's blood. It's not bad. Do you want it?
A little proactive.
Klein frowned, relaxed his brows immediately, and then he said in a deep voice,
No, there's nothing I want here.
If Kalat hadn't asked, he was even planning on buying the bone sword and researching it above the gray fog. However, the fact that the man promoted it had left him vigilant. Thus, he rationally abandoned his original plans. Kalat crossed his hands and said,
It's not expensive at all. Or would you like to look at something else?
There's no need.
Klein's pupils shrank suddenly as he turned and walked straight towards the door. Danitz hesitated momentarily before hurrying after him. Edmonton, who had a sea serpent tattoo on his arm, watched silently. He seemed as if he would reach out and stop them at any moment, but in the end, he didn't do anything. They were the powerful adventurers who had killed Steel Moretti and Blood Brambles Hendry. Once out of the room, Klein stomped down the stairs without saying a word. Danitz ran after him, alarmed. Based on his take of the situation, he didn't inquire about the situation and only followed. The two quickly returned to the square, and the crowd, which had gathered once again to either kneel or prostrate, scattered once more. But unlike before, there was a man who had still remained kneeling on the ground, motionless. Klein didn't even glance at him as he walked past without stopping. However, Danitz had taken a subconscious look, only to discover that the man's face was as dry as a weathered rock. Pah! A piece of flesh from the man's cheek fell to the ground. It was a piece of grayish skin with facial hair attached to it. He seemed to have lost all the moisture in his body. Danitz was startled and didn't dare to look again, feeling that things had become strange and dangerous at some point. The two of them passed through the alleys, left the city, and boarded a rental carriage. The carriage driver was obviously a native, around 40 years old, and his laughter was very pleasing. But along the way, he didn't say a word. It was so quiet that it made Danitz feel like his heart was beating like a drum. Klein pursed his lips and remained silent. Rubble. The rental carriage quickly arrived at the dock area. In order to change his attire, Danitz got it to stop a distance from Acid Lemon Street. After getting off the carriage, Klein didn't pay the fare or stop. He immediately took large strides and left, leaving Danitz stunned. He tossed 2 soldi to the carriage driver and hurriedly chased after Gehrman Sparrow. After a few steps, he looked back and saw the driver kneeling down with a face full of zeal and devoutness. He leaned over the ground and kissed the ground where Klein had stepped. Chapter 538. Dispel.
What's happening?
Danitz couldn't believe what he was seeing. This didn't shock him, but it left him inexplicably terrified. It was like jumping into a bucket filled with ice when drunk, feeling a bone-piercing chill permeate his body from the soles of his feet to his head.
What exactly happened? Why did things become so strange?
Danitz took a breath, forcing himself to turn his head, and he chased after Gehrman Sparrow. He found the crazy adventurer walking faster and faster, to the point where he had to run with small paces to keep up. Crossing the street and through the alley, Danitz suddenly saw a greenish shadow fall from a tree. Pa! Its body was covered in scales as it twisted its slippery body and had a triangular head. It extended its scarlet forked tongue and was none other than a rather long, venomous snake.
Dogshit. Why would there be snakes in this season?
Danitz wasn't afraid of such creatures. He had even roasted snake meat before, but it was the abnormality of everything that left him agitated. Circling around the coiling snake, Danitz subconsciously looked left and right and found that on both sides of the gutter, in the corners of ruined houses, and on the insides of rusty water pipes, there were pairs of cold, vertical, and different-colored eyes looking out. Danitz felt a chill run down his spine, as if his scalp had been pierced by a dense array of fine needles. He didn't dare to stay any longer, nor did he dare to leave. He increased his speed again and followed closely behind Gehrman Sparrow. Entering the Wind of Azure Inn, he couldn't help but look up as he walked up the wooden stairs, wanting to ask something. Suddenly, his chest tightened and his breathing stagnated. At that moment, it was as if he had dived into the bottom of the sea, being pressed down by the heavy torrents of water from every direction. Whoosh! Faintly, Danitz heard the rush of the tide and saw a faint, illusory light surround Gehrman Sparrow, as if it were forming an endless, bottomless blue ocean. Within that ocean, there was an enormous azure-blue figure holding everything up. It resembled a tower.
This.
Donitz's right foot stopped in midair, unable to lower his foot. He wasn't unfamiliar with such feelings. Back at the last pirate convention, the King of the Five Seas, Nast, was even more imposing and terrifying than this. Almost all the pirates couldn't lift their heads, and even powerhouses at the admiral rank could only barely resist. Danitz knew very well that it wasn't a result of Gehrman Sparrow's own powers. If he was at the level of a demigod, there was no need to include the mandated punishers during his hunt of Steel Movetti.
Ocean. Tide.
These two terms flashed through Danitz's mind, and he immediately thought of the matter of the Resistance's faith in sea god Calvetua.
Could it be that Gehrman Sparrow suffered the sea god's curse via an unknown process when he touched the bone sword? The devotee's corpse that lost all its moisture is one of the conditions for the curse's activation? When the carriage driver prostrated and kissed the ground, was it because he sensed the sea god's aura? Man, Gehrman Sparrow would probably die here today. Should I stay far away to avoid being implicated? At the very most, I'll come back to collect his corpse. It might still be possible to save him. I can use the Soulfall ritual to seek Captain's help. She knows so many different kinds of odd secret techniques. She should be able to resolve this problem. No, Lord. The Soulfall ritual has a requirement of being within 500 nautical miles. They're still en route, and it will take at least half a day to enter that range.
As he desperately tried to think of something, Danitz stopped panicking and treaded steadily into the luxurious suite with Gehrman Sparrow. Klein still remained silent, but his dark brown eyes seemed to have a rich azure-blue color that was nearing the color of black. He went straight to the bedroom and locked the door behind him. Danitz stood outside, in a dilemma on whether to flee or save the man. Inside the bedroom, Klein closed his eyes, waiting for the right opportunity. Suddenly, he took 4 steps in a counterclockwise manner, chanting a statement with each step. A wave of manic or high-pitched ravings rapidly rang in his ears as his spirit body shot up into the gray fog. Without a sound, he heard an indescribable, shrill, and painful howl. Klein appeared within the ancient palace, at the very end of the long, mottled table. In the motionless gray fog below, an illusory, gigantic, azure-blue sea serpent appeared. It was located in an ancient dark ruin, coiled around a half-collapsed pillar. Its hideous head was raised, and its bloody mouth was wide open, revealing many curved fangs that were even longer than a human's forearm. On its milky white fangs there were layers upon layers of flowing blood and mucus. This sea serpent madly swung its tail, setting off terrifying waves and ridiculous ripples, causing the entire ruins to sway, as if it was about to collapse. The scene rapidly shattered and dimmed. Regardless of how the unimaginably large sea serpent struggled, it was unable to turn the situation around. All it could do was let out a long, painful scream in agony as it was reduced to points of light before disappearing into the gray fog. Klein sat in the high-backed chair belonging to the fool as he quietly watched everything. He didn't make any superfluous actions for a long time. The gray fog silently spread out, and the scene seemed to return to its eternally unchanging state. After nearly a minute, Klein leaned back in his chair, sighed, and said the serpent's name,
Sea god Calvetua.
After coming into contact with the bone sword, he had already felt the abnormality. And during his conversation with Baldi Kalat, he had keenly discovered that a tiny, weak, but extremely cold and sinister energy had invaded his body at some point in time and was slowly corrupting his soul. Klein made a prompt decision and turned around to leave. He then sensed that there was a connection between the sinister power and his surroundings. It gradually strengthened and slowly connected to an unknown place. So, as he diverted attention to resist the corruption, he also controlled himself so as to not interact with his surroundings. Klein believed that as long as he responded to the abnormality on his journey back, it would only serve to intensify the corruption to the point of making irreversible. At first, he wanted to find a nearby washroom and use the gray fog shielding in isolation to remove the cold and sinister power, but after repeated considerations, he decided to leave the area. This was because there were many followers of the sea god around, and it was extremely likely for an accident to happen. During this process, Klein grasped another point, which was that if he dispelled it ahead of time, the power projected by sea god Calvetua would leave remnants in his flesh and blood. The consequences and effects would be unknown. He had no choice but to patiently wait for the opportunity to purify himself by waiting for the cold and sinister energy to thoroughly permeate his spirit. Reflecting on everything that had happened, Klein lightly rapped the edge of the table and muttered to himself,
It's not that strong.
The sea god's level was much lower than he had imagined. His original plan was to use the method that had finished off Aemon's avatar to deal with the sea god Calvetua's projection, which was trying to take over his body. However, even before he had even fused with the Black Emperor card or through his paper angel, Calvetua ended up being dispelled by the gray fog directly, without leaving a single trace. On this basis, Klein concluded that sea god Calvetua's level was inferior to blasphemer Amon, even though it was possible that the latter was more adept at intrusion, but it had only been an avatar.
Was it thrown off its pedestal by the Lord of Storms, or is it not even at the level of an angel? It's just a slightly stronger demigod that can respond to the prayers of its believers within a certain range?
Klein recalled and found that sea god Calvetua was in an abnormal state.
The foundational existence of this evil spirit is rather weak, as though it can collapse at any moment. Moreover, it felt like it had fused with the spirit world in the ruins it was in. And it's precisely as a result of this that it was able to escape the encirclement of the Church of Storms?
Klein leaned back in his chair and made a guess.
What happened today is definitely not a coincidence. It stems from archaeologist Letitia's act of taking away some important artifact in the Forgotten Temple. It caused sea god Calvetua's condition to instantly deteriorate when it was already barely surviving. It made it impossible for it to hold on to its existence. As it got its believers to track the item, it also prepared to possess another body for its survival. That bone sword should have originated from its demigod body, and it hides a bit of the power it projects. As long as the target is suitable, it will infiltrate the body of the person who touches it, corrupting the soul and establishing the coordinates. It will then allow its spirit to be transferred over before it dissipates. But clearly, it's not adept in such matters. Yes, it's not the Snake of Mercury. It's unable to create a closed loop on itself for reincarnation. It's also not like blasphemer Amon, who can be a parasite inside a person's soul. To really possess my body, it will directly cause its body to crumble and create a terrifying monster. According to this logical development, the dying Calvetua will likely engage in many crazy actions in the near future.
Klein frowned. He didn't hesitate as he plummeted into the fog and returned to the real world. He unlocked the door, opened it, and entered the living room, startling the pacing Danets. Danitz looked him up and down a few times and asked cautiously and warily,
Are you all right?
Klein maintained Gehrman Sparrow's persona and calmly replied,
It's settled.
Settled?
Danitz looked around before glancing at the bedroom, wondering if he had been hallucinating, that there wasn't any sea god curse.
What did he do in the bedroom? He was lifted from the curse of the sea god in just a minute or two? Man, this guy has a huge secret.
Danitz took 2 steps back and made way. Beside a table covered with a significant number of miscellaneous items, the wheelchair-bound baldy, Kalat, wore a look of regret as he said to the tattooed man,
What a pity.
Just a little more. He didn't pick it up, just touched it. Edmonton sighed as well. Kalat looked at the slightly bent-bone sword and fervently said to himself,
When an outsider picks up that holy sword, God will walk the land again.
Edmonton fell to his knees as well, as though confessing to a deity. As time passed, both Kalat and Edmonton suddenly heard 2 miserable shrieks. They looked up and saw that 2 of their companions had collapsed. Their skin was like a weathered rock, having lost all the moisture in their bodies. Kalat and Edmonton glanced at each other and felt a peculiar atmosphere. Both of them stood up at the same time and looked at the table. That milky white holy sword cracked loudly, splintering into countless small pieces. Chapter 539, Late Night Operations. When an outsider picks up that holy sword, God will walk the land again. But what happens if the holy sword shatters? These 2 sentences echoed in the minds of Kalat and Edmonton. The matter was completely in the gaps of their knowledge. For a few seconds they stared at the shattered holy sword, their expressions dull while they remained speechless. They couldn't believe that the holy sword, which had only been touched by an outsider in the evening, had suddenly shattered. What does this mean? What does it represent? The 2 of them didn't dare to think too deeply about it. They felt as if they had returned to the very beginning. Back then, one of the secret bases of the resistance had been discovered by the Loan military. They were raided without any warning, and this resulted in their fathers being killed in that massacre. Their female relatives were abducted and sold to different places. Before receiving the grievous news, the feelings Kalat and Edmonton felt that day mirrored what they felt today. They felt heavy, confused, expectant, and unease, all of them mixing to form an intense pressure. Kalat turned his wheelchair and said in a deep voice,
Return to the forest, find the high priest, and figure out the reason. Perhaps this is the latest revelation from God.
Edmonton immediately stood up, saying to his remaining subordinates,
Continue searching for those blasphemers, but do not stay here. Also, instruct the believers outside not to hold any rituals or even pray.
The unexpected change in events made him extra vigilant. By him, in the corner of the street where the Cathedral of Waves was located, holding a stack of white folded paper, Danax turned his head to the side, feeling a mix of nervousness, worry, and puzzlement.
You mean that I'm to post them in different parts of the street and finally post it on the main door of the Cathedral of Waves?
He was very afraid that the door of the cathedral would suddenly open and a group of fist-brandishing priests and bishops would rush out, immediately attacking them without even asking why he had posted the poster. Klein maintained his coldness and said,
Yes.
His original plan was to hand the matter of sea god Calvetua over to Mr. Hanged Man so that he could warn the Church of Storms. However, considering that he still held the secret of Banzi Harbor, and he might even have reported the matter, it would be easy for him to arouse suspicion with another piece of important information in such a short period of time. As for the solution, it was very simple. He could post a few posters on the mandated Punishers' front door so that they could see it as soon as they came out. There was a small problem with Klein's plan. He couldn't tell which of the shops around the Cathedral of Waves was the cover identity of the mandated Punishers. All he could do was make Danitz work a little harder and stick the posters everywhere in prominent spots, including, but not limited to, the front door of the Cathedral of Waves.
I should have run away earlier. Why would I think that this fellow had saved my life? Perhaps I would have been converted into gold pounds if he were any other powerful adventurer. No, Who would have imagined that this lunatic would so easily resolve the sea god's curse? Fleeing might put me in an even worse state.
While lamenting inwardly, Danitz unrolled the pile of white paper and casually glanced at the content. After Letitia Dolera and company entered and left the sea god's ruin in Samim Island, they were pursued by the Resistance. Meanwhile, Kalat and the Resistance were trying to sell a strange bone sword that looked a little bent. Sea god Calvetua's body is on the brink of collapse, with an extremely deranged mental state. Danitz froze for 2 seconds. Then he subconsciously glanced at Gehrman Sparrow.
I can understand the first few statements, but why is there a mention of sea god Calvetua being on the brink of collapse and in an extremely deranged mental state? How does Gehrman Sparrow know? Did he discover a problem when he was dealing with the sea god's curse? And how did he deal with the sea god's curse? The organization behind him is more powerful than I thought. Could it be that it's similar to the Aurora Order, in which they serve a real deity?
The more he thought about it, the more Danitz trembled in fear. The first time he heard of the Aurora Order had originated from a robbery at sea. Back then, it was the first time he saw his captain's serious expression. After that, he was taught some so-called general knowledge of the mysterious world. Klein responded to Danitz with an emotionless gaze. In the poster, he had eliminated any subjective assumptions, and he had only described the matters that could be confirmed with certainty so as to not interfere with the judgment of the higher-ups in the Church of Storms. Among them, the content regarding an important item that Letitia and company had taken away was excluded. The Lost Temple was changed to a broader and more inclusive sea god ruin. The base was obviously abandoned by Kalat and the others after realizing that something had happened to the sea god, so it was also left unmentioned. Danitz suddenly retracted his gaze, afraid to look any further.
Captain said that the more secrets someone has, the more dangerous they are.
He thought for a while and worriedly said,
If we stick it on the front door of the cathedral, it will definitely garner immense attention from the Church of Storms. Will they discover that I was the one who did it?
Klein gave a terse answer.
Yes.
Danitz forced a smile and said,
Then wouldn't I be in grave danger?
Klein used his clown ability to control his expression and calmly replied,
You were already a pirate who has a bounty for your head. Do you think you can swagger down the main streets of Byam now?
Klein lampooned inwardly.
That's true. No matter what, they will still capture me and claim my bounty. No, there's something wrong with that.
Danitz blurted out,
But my bounty will increase.
Klein looked at him, but he didn't say anything. All he did was grin a little. For a moment, Danitz thought he heard a rhetorical question.
Isn't this a good thing? A good thing for a donkey to kick.
With a dry chuckle, Danitz took the pile of posters and, taking advantage of the heavy winds and late night, posted them in prominent spots on the street near the Cathedral of Waves.
It really looks like posting a small advertisement.
Klein, who had one hand in his pocket, observed from afar and commented inwardly. Male, he sighed and thought.
It's good to have an assistant. At least, I don't have to do something that tarnishes my reputation. If I were in Tingen or Backland, if something like that had happened, the scene was too beautiful to imagine.
Danitz finally reached outside the Cathedral of Waves, plastered the poster on the front door, clenched his fist, and pounded on the door. After finishing all of this, he turned around and ran, as if there were 10 mandated punishers running after him from behind. Klein didn't dare to be negligent. He pulled out a paper figurine, shook it off, and burned it to ashes before briskly walking to another street. After his recent encounters with the mandated punishers, he had a deep understanding of their style, and he didn't dare to be the slightest bit careless. It was only when they were far away from the Cathedral of Waves that they slowed down and regained their normal walking speed. Danitz had a good constitution. His face wasn't flushed, nor was he panting. He was slightly puzzled and asked,
Why didn't you just write to the police or throw it in the Governor General's office?
Before Klein could reply, he had already realized why.
That's right. The lower-ranking police and the staff of the Governor General's office are locals. They might very well pity the resistance or might be clandestine believers of Sea God.
As they were talking, they turned a corner and saw an extremely large red building in front of them. The inside was brightly lit, and music could be heard from within. People and carriages streamed in and out the door. It didn't exude any vibes that it was late at night. After 1 second of hesitation, a smile appeared on Danitz's face, a smile that all men understood.
Ha, we actually ended up walking here.
Red Theater?
Klein, who is rich in theoretical knowledge, suddenly came to a realization. Danitz laughed mischievously.
This is one of the most famous places in the entire Sonia Sea. There are mysterious and flirtatious Balaam girls, passionate Faina Potter girls, open and alluring Intis maidens, tall and graceful Fasak ladies, conservative and quiet Loan women, gentle and docile natives.
This fellow knows a lot. He comes often?
Klein swept a glance at Blazing and said nothing. For some reason, Danitz felt as though he had been seen through, and he immediately laughed awkwardly.
This is what pirates talk about when bragging. I've only been here a few times. I didn't have much money in the past. I could only find some average ones. And it's mainly in the area of the Fog Sea. Afterward, I joined the Golden Dream.
No wonder. Although Vice Admiral Iceberg's men receive quite good employment perks and often get to share in the treasure, it's still quite difficult to save up a few houses in Bayam. Compared to the typical pirate, this guy at least knows temperance and saves his money.
Klein thought in enlightenment. Danitz didn't wish to continue on the topic as he changed the topic.
There are a lot of street girls in Bayam, especially there.
He pointed into the distance and said,
There was once a pirate who did an experiment. He randomly knocked on a family's door, produced some money, and requested to do it with the mistress once. In the end, 3 to 4 families out of the 10 agreed. Tisk, if it's someone like you who has the standard Loan look, almost no one will refuse you. They might secretly hide their daughters to prevent you from discovering her. Hehe, Loan's navy would commit many murders and rapes here every year. They aren't any better than the pirates, but they would only be sent back to the country and pay some small fines.
Klein listened quietly, and he suddenly thought back to the evening when the believers of the sea god were praying around the pool. He thought back to their feverish and numb faces. Backland, within the Odora family's villa. Emlyn White, who had taken the initiative to expose certain problems about himself, nervously followed Cosme underground. He once again arrived in the gray stone hall where the black iron coffin was kept. Although Emlyn had rehearsed this scene in his mind dozens of times, he still couldn't completely remove the tension and apprehension in his heart.
Esteemed Lord Nibs, why have you summoned me?
In this state, he suddenly understood a problem. From the viewpoint of theater studies, the role he was acting as should hide his worries and fears.
There's no need for any special concealment. I did well.
Emlyn was suddenly much calmer. A deep, aged voice sounded from the coffin that was covered with symbols and magic labels.
To reward you. For the ancestor, you risked your life to pray to the fool. Although you didn't receive a response, you bore an enormous risk. This is an act that needs to be rewarded. Here is an acceptance draft for £7,000, a reward for you. I didn't give it to you in a timely fashion due to the great smog of Backland, but it's never too late. At the same time, you must always be aware of yourself and not relax. If anything abnormal happens, immediately inform Cosme.
He really gave me money.
Emlyn almost forgot to close his mouth. Chapter 540, Suppression. Even when Emlyn White left the Odora family's underground region, he still found things surreal. He couldn't believe that he could so easily be rewarded with £7,000. The acceptance draft was light and weightless in his hand, but he felt the absurdity of reality.
The hanged man's method was really effective. Instead of exposing me and punishing me, Lord Nibs gave me a generous reward, and this was done solely to feign ignorance while encouraging me to make attempts so that he can observe in secret. Are the thoughts of the sanguine that complicated as well?
Emlyn sighed, his mind feeling adrift. Quickly, he stopped his thoughts from wandering and turned his attention back to the reward of £7,000.
With this, I can buy that baron's remains from the hanged man and concoct it into a potion. I'll soon become a baron. Sanguine Baron, Lord Emlyn White.
Emlyn's eyes lit up as his footsteps turned significantly brisk. Within the Sanguine, if one wasn't bestowed the corresponding ritual by the elders, they would remain stuck at the same level they were at during birth. It was almost impossible to rely on time to advance. Unless one was extremely lucky, having an ancestor of the family that was nearing the end of their lifespan such that they had no choice but to bestow their powers to a descendant through a ritual, most of Emlyn's sanguine peers would remain stuck in the concept of adulthood. There might not be any chance of them obtaining an aristocratic title for decades. Emlyn's father and mother had lived for years, but they had yet to become barons up this very day. They couldn't even see any hope of becoming one. As Emlyn walked out the door, he couldn't help but glance at the nearby Cosmiodora.
This elderly sanguine who has been active in the Roselle era has only been a baron up to this day, and I am about to reach this rank as well. One day I will become a sanguine marquis like Lord Nibs. No, a duke, or even a prince. Only by doing so will I be able to shoulder the responsibility of being the sanguine's messiah. Yes, the baron's remains is only about 4,000 pounds. I'll have a lot of money left. I can even buy a few more dolls and give them some new clothes.
Emlyn unconsciously straightened his back and began to walk more and more proudly. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, Derek lit some candles and prepared for the sacrificial ritual. The lightning frequency alternated several times before he finally found an opportunity. He was very sure that the chief wasn't able to keep an eye on him at this moment, because he had left the City of Silver with the little boy, Jack, who had recovered somewhat, and a group of explorers in search for the so-called route that led from the coast to the destroyed city. It didn't take long for Derek to set up everything and say Mr. Fool's honorific name in a reverent, low voice. He very skillfully and methodically sacrificed the Spirit Eater's stomach pouch needed by Miss Magician and the Beyonder ingredients designated by Mr. Hanged Man to the ruler above the gray fog. There were many cracks on the City of Silver's solid city walls, but they were filled to the brim with black, hard soil. Strands of dense weeds grew on them, swaying in the wind like human hair. All of a sudden, all of them stood up as if they wanted to capture something, but they turned limp without any strength left in them. Early morning at the Cathedral of Waves. Alger Wilson, who had come to collect the bounty, heard an important piece of news from the diocese bishop, Chogo. Letitia Dolera of the Moses Ascetic Order had disguised herself as an archaeologist and entered the depths of the jungle on Saimim Island. It was unknown what she did that inflicted grievous injuries to sea god Calvetua, who had been in hiding for years, pushing it to the verge of collapse. As a result, it was frantically searching for an opportunity to survive. Rumor has it that this evil spirit, which calls itself Sea God, had been discovered by two powerful cardinals of the military a long time ago. After it was defeated by them through the use of a sealed artifact, it could only barely escape and hide. This situation has persisted for more than 100 years. Without any intrinsic changes, why would it suddenly collapse and be unable to maintain its existence? Alger frowned slightly, wondering what the difference was.
A situation deliberately created by the Moses Ascetic Order? But why didn't they do so in the past 100 years to complement one of their other plans?
Between speculation and doubt, Algier suddenly became aware of an important factor.
The biggest and most fundamental difference between the last 100 years and now was that the world had come to buy him. Mr. Fool's Blessed had come to the Rorstead archipelago. Does his appearance anywhere indicate that something big is about to happen or is brewing? Previously, it was the Great Smog of Backland, and there was the abnormality in Banzi Harbor. Now, there's the dying struggle of sea god Calvetua, and the unknown plot of the Moses Ascetic Order. No, to be precise, wherever a major problem is brewing or about to happen, Mr. Fool's Blessed will be there. They accept Mr. Fool's arrangements and pursue the activities of those secret organizations, the evil gods and angels.
As soon as his train of thought changed, Alger was suddenly enlightened, feeling as though he had grasped the truth.
It's not that things happen wherever the world is, but that the world and the other blessed will appear when something is about to happen. What good does this bring to Mr. Fool? Is it a plot solely to destroy the enemy's schemes, or does it help him lift his seal and release more power?
Alger held back his doubts and decided to seize the opportunity to submit some intel from before. Han hakasho haligwist. He clenched his right hand into a fist and pressed it against his left breast. He said with a look of hesitation,
Your Excellency, while pursuing the remnant forces of steel, I heard a piece of intel.
What is it?
Chogo had originally planned to send this bishop-ranked captain out into the sea to search for traces of the resistance, but he was forcibly interrupted by him. For a moment he felt irritated, Pop. Alger recalled and said,
Someone mentioned Banzi Harbor in a conversation. They mentioned that an abnormality had happened there, but the descendants of the Medici family were well hidden and didn't end up being discovered.
Banzi Harbor, abnormality. Chogo took a step forward and pressed.
What else did they say?
Other than mentioning that there was a fallen bishop of the church, nothing else. Your Excellency, is the Medici family a dark family of the Fourth Epoch?
Alger asked deliberately. Chogo's expression sank.
That's not something you should know. I'll report it to His Eminence Cotman at once.
Cotman was a Church of Storms cardinal, the Archbishop of Rorstead Sea, a high-ranking deacon of the mandated Punishers, and the true ruler of the Beyonder world in the archipelago, John Cotman. Chogo thought for a moment before asking,
Who was the person who mentioned this? What does he look like?
Alger was long prepared.
I don't know them, and they never showed up again. I remember that the person mentioning Banzi Harbor and the Medici family was an ordinary-looking, young man with a thin face, a broad forehead, black eyes, and black hair. He wore a monocle. He seemed to notice that I was eavesdropping, but he didn't show any anger. Instead, he smiled at me.
Alger had been describing blasphemer Aemon.
This is really a suitable person to use as a reason. He wouldn't appear to defend himself, and even if he did, no one would believe it. And clearly, any divination regarding him would have zero results. If Beyonder means are used to confirm my information source, there will be strong signs of interference from Mr. Fool, and they won't be able to get an accurate answer. From the looks of it, this is equivalent to what Ammon did.
Alger thought with considerable relief. Chogo nodded lightly.
Find these people and trace the whereabouts of the resistance.
Yes, Your Excellency.
Alger answered with a look of piety and struck his right fist on his left breast. Dark clouds covered the sky as the rain fell down in torrents, creating white fog in the process. In the port of Bayam, the blue water rose slowly but firmly, and the freighters and liners rocked like leaves fluttering in mid-air. The rain continued to fall, and the sea level gradually approached the dike. The city was flooded with water in many places, and the environment was greatly suppressed. One by one, the fanatical and numb locals, in their taraba shirts and tattered jackets, came to the edge of the cliff or the dike before jumping into the sea. Their flesh and skin rapidly lost moisture as they fell, and they were already desiccated corpses by the time they fell into the sea. A group of people were rioting as they hugged a Navy sailor who was walking out of a base. They angrily bit him to death with their teeth, reducing him to a mangled, bloody mess, and caused chaos on the streets. Whoosh! Boom! The dike collapsed, and the rising seawater poured into Bayam City. When Klein jolted awake, his mind was filled with the scene from his dream.
For a seer, this was a very clear revelation. Sea god Calvetua has failed to find a way to survive and has completely given up, resulting in it going completely mad. It wanted to create a storm, stir up a tsunami, and drown the Rorstead archipelago so that countless can join it in death. At the same time, its devotees are starting to do extreme acts. I've already informed the Church of Storms. They'll likely be able to stop it. No, even if I didn't inform them, they'll definitely be able to sense a problem with the appearance of such a situation. They would then make the necessary response.
Klein rolled to his feet, wore his clothes, and walked out of his bedroom. He saw blazing Danitz standing by the window, looking out. He saw the clouds hanging low as rain poured down, as though it was endless.
A sign has appeared?
Klein walked over to Danitz, who was also looking out at the repressive weather. He could faintly hear the abnormal sound of the tide. In the midst of silence, the sound of explosive thunder suddenly rang out in the air. The leaden-colored clouds quickly split apart, and the falling rain lost its source. In the direction of the docks, everything returned to normal. The morning sun shone down from high up in the sky, bathing Bayham in holy light.
John Cotman changed the weather.
Danitz hissed and said to himself,
John Cotman. The Church of Storm's Cardinal and high-ranking deacon of the mandated Punishers? He suppressed Calvet to his powers?
Klein retracted his gaze while in thought. Danitz heaved a sigh of relief.
I was rather worried just now, afraid that the sea god who's on the brink of a breakdown would create a disaster. But there's John Cotman.
Seeing that Gehrman Sparrow was silent, he continued adding,
At sea, even the King of the Five Seas and Queen Mystic won't be his equal. Captain said he's a Sequence 3 demigod. The potion's name is, the Sea King.